Hey everyone, I've been wanting to make a video talking about something which has been bugging me for quite a while, but I had a troubling encounter recently which made me finally want to speak up and say something about it and start a conversation about this. So people have commented in the past on my videos noting how I tend to read more books written by women than are written by men. And these aren't usually put in an aggressive or like accusatory way. They're just sort of commenting and querying it, asking if there's a particular reason for this. Although these comments usually are written by men. And somebody commented recently asking if this is a conscious political act, if I read more books written by women as, you know, making a political statement. And of course my gut reaction is like, well, no, I just read books that I'm most drawn to, no matter who they're written by. That seems like a natural thing. But then recently I was at a gathering with some friends and their families at a big gathering. And one of the fathers of a friend of mine came up to me and said, I looked at your book blog recently. And I was sort of a bit surprised and taken aback because we'd never discussed books before. And I said, oh yeah, wow, okay, great. And he said, do you only read books by women? And that question sort of stumped me because I just responded, well, no, I read books by all kinds of writers. And he said, oh, well, it looks to me like you only read books by women. And then he turned away and went and spoke to somebody else, and that was it. So the next morning, I went on my blog and tried to view it as somebody coming to it for the first time and how they might view it. So, of course, it is true, looking at the banner of my blog, I have photos of the actresses Marilyn Monroe and Judy Holliday sitting there reading books. And in the sidebar of my blog, I have quotes from a number of different writers talking about the state of loneliness and these quotes about the state of loneliness. And they all happen to be quotes by female writers. But then I looked at the content of the blog and the reviews that I had posted and written recently, and out of the 20 most recent reviews of particular books, 9 of those books were written by men, and 11 of those books were written by women. It was almost completely half and half. So I asked myself, why would he see that and then ask if I only read books written by women? And why would that be the only thing he asks me? Like, I don't know how many books I've written about on my blog in the past 5.5 years that I've been keeping this book blog. I've written hundreds and hundreds of posts about all kinds of different writers and styles of writings and issues to do with reading, but that would be the only thing that he would want to comment on. But I still ask myself, if almost half the books I post about were written by men, why would he ask if I only read books written by women? And I can only conclude it's because he assumes that because I'm a man, I should mainly read books written by other men. Now, I didn't challenge him about this in the moment because this always happens to me. Does this ever happen to you when you're sort of blindsided by something in a social situation that you aren't expecting? Just give like a polite response. Like that's my instinctual reaction, what to do to sort of like smooth over the situation. But then of course, in retrospect, I start thinking about it a lot more and saying like, oh no, I should have like raised these objections and raised these other questions with them. But of course I didn't, because I think because I'm just raised to be a nice middle-class boy and, you know, give polite responses. Anyway, this follows a trend I've noticed throughout my life where men, mostly men who don't read all that much, and I'm talking about maybe 2 to 3 books a year, primarily read books by other men. And I know whenever this issue comes up and the statement is made that women read books by everyone and men mainly read books by other men, the first response that comes to this is the objection of someone who says, I'm a man and I read books by women, or father or my brother or my husband read books by women, so that disproves that theory, that's wrong. And yeah, there are many exceptions to this, not least of all by the majority of men who are also on BookTube and who comment frequently about all the books by women that they read, which is wonderful. But in my experience, men who don't read all that much primarily read books by other men. And this is carried out also with other male authors, because I'm someone who loves to go see authors speak and talk about their work. And inevitably, when a male author is asked about what are some of their primary influences, almost all the time they'll cite other male authors, and this is carried out in the New York Times Book Review, which do a regular Q&A with an author, and one of the questions is asking them about influences. And if you go back and look through a lot of those interviewers, a lot of the male authors will cite other male authors, and this is something that Lauren Groff pointed out a year ago when she did this New York Times Book Review Q&A, talking about this disparity, and so she self-consciously only talks about other female authors. So for me personally, this just feels like something I've noticed throughout my life, and it feels like it's something that's been instilled in me since childhood. I think I've commented before how I was raised in a household with one older sister, and we were raised on very gendered lines where my mother primarily took the duty of raising my sister, and my father mainly took the duty of watching after me and raising me. And my parents were really wonderful in encouraging both my sister and I to read from a really early age. But, we were raised to read on very gendered lines, where I was given Hardy Boy books and my sister was given Babysitter Club books. So I think people are raised with these sort of gender lines and never think to question it all that much until they take a step back and look at their bookshelves or the things that they've read over the past several years and wonder why it's mainly books written by men that they've been reading. It's something that the journalist Alice Fishburn did before last year when she looked at her reading and noticed that she was mainly reading books by men. So she made a conscious decision last year in 2018 to only read books written by women. And she wrote a really interesting article in response to this at the end of that year and her conclusions of only reading books written by women. So I'll link that below because it's a really interesting article. I think it was only after going to university and taking some classes with some really inspiring teachers like the teacher Carol Dixon at Goddard College and the critic Lorna Sage at the University of East Anglia that I started to really think about gender bias and opening myself up to authors that I had never read before. I've never limited myself to reading books by authors of just one gender or another, although, like as many of you know, I'm a big fan of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I try to read all of the long list every year, and so, that's 16 books, so that's quite a lot of books written by women to read over a relatively short amount of time. But I've noticed over time that many of my favorite books happen to have been written by women, and so when I'm asked the very common question of who is your favorite author and what is your favorite book, I will inevitably answer Joyce Carol Oates and The Waves by Virginia Woolf. And for this video today, I'm wearing my Joyce Carol Oates t-shirt. And I've realized over time that reading books by women is a political act because it's challenging that broad norm that men only read books by other men. It's a challenge to this image of masculinity that I've never felt like I fit into, and I know many men don't feel like they fit into this certain image of masculinity. And it is something which will be challenged by men who do adhere to this certain mold of masculinity, who will step back and say, seems like you only read books written by women, when in fact I read books by a whole variety of people. And it makes me sympathetic with an article like the one written by John Boyne a couple years ago where he stated, women are better writers than men. I'll link that below because it's a really interesting article, because it's an exaggerated challenge which emphasizes that there is a gender bias in what some people read. Of course, there will be instances where the books we've read recently will have mainly been written by men, or our favorite books of the year will have mostly been written by men, or the books on a book prize list will mainly be comprised of books written by men. And this may be a coincidence, but sometimes there are underlying structures which will have made this so and which will favor books written by men. So as a reader, I always try to take a step back and look at that now and then, especially if I'm making a list of books like I did at the start of this year when I made a video talking about 19 classic books that I want to read over the course of the year and how I wanted there to be a greater diversity on that list. And that's something that I said at the start of that video, which obviously troubled some people. So I got a couple critical comments, even though when you look at that list, it's almost half and half still books written by men and women. It was even claimed that I was being sexist and racist because I consciously wanted a diverse list, and as a white man, I should certainly know better. But I want to pose the opposite challenge to some men. Why do you only read books by other men? So thank you for letting me get that off my chest. Let me know if you have any thoughts in the comments below, and just for fun, because of the nature of this video, here are some favorite books written by women. So there is the book of short stories called Hi Lonesome by Joyce Oates, and this is actually what I named my book blog after. And then she also published this nonfiction book called Woman (Writer), which is very topical. But one of my favorite books by Joyce Oates is the novel Blonde. Then there is the novel The Waves by Virginia Woolf in this beautiful edition. And the novel Ladder of Years by Anne Tyler, which I have this special Franklin Library edition of, which has a really good introduction in it, written by her about her inspiration for writing this novel, one of my favorite novels of all time. And the novel The Sea by Iris Murdoch, Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, and The Incantations by Susan Barker, which is a really creative family saga historical novel. The novel Sophie and the Sibyl by Patricia Duncker, who's a really underrated writer, really great writer. And the novel In America by Susan Sontag, which is absolutely one of my favorite novels of all time. So let me know some of your favorite novels by women in the comments below as well. And I will speak to you again soon. Bye, everyone.